All right, let's walk through all the steps to properly pre-oxygenate an infant. We're going to go through all the logistics here. We'll start off with, will they allow you to pre-oxygenate them? And if the answer is no, if they're pulling everything off, you can't start an IV, then you're going to need to do something to facilitate that pre-ox period. And so that's where the delayed sequence intubation or delayed sequence induction, whatever you want to call it, comes into play, because that's a procedural sedation, with that procedure being pre-oxygenation. And so if you can't get an IV, you may need something like intranasal midazolam, intranasal ketamine, or IM ketamine. If you already have an IV, then you can still use ketamine. You just want to make sure you're pushing it real slow. All the bad things with ketamine happen when you push it fast. And we don't want to be rushed into a spot of having to give a paralytic because we have laryngospasms or the kid goes apneic. So you want to give it nice and slow, 1 to 2 milligrams per kilo, until they will allow you to position them properly and to put a nasal cannula on and all the things that you need to do to set yourself up for success. If your plan for pre-ox is just blow by oxygen next to the kid until you push your drugs, you're going to find that your saturations plummet pretty quick. All right, so let's start off with positioning. We know you're supposed to pad underneath the shoulders, and that's because kids have a larger occiput, and so when they are laying flat, their neck will hyperflex like this, and it can kink, and you get high pips, and it's very hard to ventilate. But if you just pad under the shoulders, you'll notice that the head hyperextends like this. And this is not what you want. You don't want this like hanging motion here. You want the face to be flat, like parallel with the ceiling, but maintaining this earlobe to sternal notch. And so I like to roll a towel under the shoulder, and then I'll use this end to roll up to get that head flat while still maintaining that earlobe to sternal notch. This is not only beneficial for like intubation or putting in a supraglottic airway, but also for your bag valve mask ventilation. It's going to allow a more direct route. You're not going to have these pharyngeal structures getting in the way. And so it's best just to ramp up, get the positioning perfect right away, and not wait till right before you intubate to position them properly. All right, now you notice I have this nasal cannula on. This is to provide apneic oxygenation. And I'm going to keep it on throughout the entire pre-ox period, and it is beneficial because it is flowing oxygen. If you don't have a pediatric nasal cannula, you can use an adult nasal cannula. The goal of this is to replace all of the dead space between the mouth, the airways, everything up to the alveoli, to constantly be refreshing that and replacing that with oxygen. So that way, when I push my paralytic and the child stops breathing and they come to a functional residual capacity, they come to this equilibrium with the atmospheric pressure, then I'm still replacing that CO2 because there's still a gas exchange that occurs when the child's apneic. And it's just like an adult, there's still this diffusion that's happening. And so if you're replacing that CO2 with oxygen, it's going to give you a little bit longer of a safe apneic period. Now, when you review the studies for this, you'll find that this is extremely safe. It's not like you're blowing, pneumothoraces on kids by having them at 15 liters per minute. However, I think the model that works best is a study that showed that if the child was less than 1, they ran it at 5 liters per minute. If they were between the age of 1 and 7, it was 10 liters per minute. And then 8 and older, they ran it at 15 liters per minute. It had a really good safety profile, and it showed that it did show a significant increase in that safe apneic period, as long as there wasn't like some VQ mismatch from pulmonary shunting. So the child's got pneumonia or something that's not allowing that oxygen to passively diffuse into the alveoli and then into the blood. All right, so nasal cannula on, we'll say this kid is less than 1, so we're going to be running this at 5 liters per minute. And I put it above the head like this so it's easy to take off after you intubate. Now, if they'll tolerate it, this is where you're going to place an oral airway. If they have a gag reflex, you can skip this step, but you're going to measure this from the corner of the lip to the angle of the jaw. You can use a tongue depressor to put this in. I know they say you put it in backwards and then rotate it. But we'll get this in, and this is going to not keep the airway open. This is important to remember. Doesn't really keep the airway open. It keeps the mouth open. So when you put the mask on and you're ventilating and you're pulling the jaw and the mandible into the mask, sometimes you have a tendency to close the mouth when that's happening. Now, in an ideal, perfect world, this would keep the mouth open, would keep the airway open. But you don't just want to count on this, right? You want to actually be providing a head tilt chin lift or a jaw thrust to bring this mandible to the mask, which brings me to the mask. So the way this is sized, you want the bottom part to fit between the chin and the lip, in this little space right here. And then this part's going to come right over the nose. And I like to take it and kind of pull it out a little bit and then let it form around it. If there's too much air in here, you can take out a little bit of air to make it form nicely around. Now, you shouldn't have any problem with this nasal cannula underneath it. There was a study that showed a couple of scenarios where the provider said that the nasal cannula prevented them from getting a good seal. I don't know how much I buy that. If you're getting a nice seal on this, if you're providing good technique, this should not be an issue. All right, so what you'll see in simulation is sometimes people will take the mask, and if they can't get a good seal, they'll just push down harder, right? And it makes intuitive sense to do that. However, when you do that, remember the tongue is attached to the mandible. So when you push the mandible down, then you're putting that tongue, you're distracting that and displacing that into the hypopharynx. And so that's not good, right? Because then you're going to see high pressures on your manometer, and it's going to be very difficult to see adequate chest rise, and that's what we're watching for. So you put your mask on. If you have two providers that can do this, this is ideal. You do the thumbs up technique, thumbs go over this, you bring the jaw actually to the mask instead of pushing the mask down to the jaw. And then on your BVM, you're going to have your pediatric end-tidal CO2 or your neonate end-tidal CO2, the one that's the smallest, that has the least amount of dead space. You're going to put that on here and have that so you can actually quantitate that you're delivering breaths. So now I'm going to place this on here. If I don't have two providers, like right now, what I'm going to do is just make sure that I'm lifting this chin into the mask. Now I got my manometer up here. I got 5 of PEEP on. I think 5 of PEEP is good in the pre-ox period. If you start getting higher than that, you run the risk of popping open this esophageal sphincter, which they say opens up somewhere between 20 and 25 centimeters of water pressure. So I'm going to deliver my breaths. I'm watching for adequate chest rise, and I don't want to get really above 20 at all. One breath every 3 to 5 seconds, and I got my PEEP set at 5 right now. All right, so now when I'm ready to intubate, I'm going to deliver that breath. I'm going to take this off, and this nasal cannula is going to stay on. So I'll pull out my oral airway, and now I can go ahead and I can intubate. I'm already positioned properly. I want to, before I go in and intubate, try to aim for an SpO2 of 97% and then hold that for 3 minutes. There was a study by Air Methods that showed that was the magic number that gave them the longest apneic or safe apneic period without desaturating. So 97% is the goal. Hold it for 3 minutes to denitrogenate and then go ahead and intubate. Once the child is intubated, you can pop the mask off, keep the end-tidal CO2 on, and then start ventilating. And then this nasal cannula can just peel off from the top.